The first thing Claire noticed wasn't the smell of stale coffee in the air or the squeak of her heels on the polished tile. It was the way the clerk's eyes narrowed the moment she stepped through the glass doors. Not a word had been spoken, but his look already said it. You don't belong here. She'd been through this before, in ways both small and loud, the lingering glances, the casual, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The subtle shuffle of papers, as if her presence somehow disrupted the air. But today was different. Today, she was here with a check so large it could pay the salaries of everyone in this bank branch for months. The bank was small, but polished rows of waiting chairs lined up like obedient soldiers, posters of smiling families framed against bright blue walls, the faint hum of the AC filling the spaces between coughs and murmurs. The scent of printer ink floated under the overhead lights, sharp and sterile. Claire walked to the counter, her chin high, her fingers wrapped around a check signed in looping, unmistakable handwriting. The clerk, whose name tag read Stephen M., looked her up and down. He was in his late 40s, with a paunch pressing against his polyester shirt and a jaw set in the way people have when they've decided something about you before you even speak. Yes. His tone was polite in the way an icicle is thin, cold, and ready to snap. I need to cash this, Claire said, sliding the check toward him. He glanced at it, then back at her, then at it again, slower this time. She could see the math in his head, the suspicion crawling across his face like a shadow. This is quite a sum, he said finally. Yes. And you say it's yours? Claire's jaw tightened. I don't say it. It is. Stephen's lips twitched into what might have been a smile if it weren't dripping with doubt. He turned to his computer, typed something, and then shook his head slightly, as though confirming his worst fear. I'm going to need further verification, he said. Fine. What do you need? He hesitated, then leaned in slightly, voice lower. Do you have proof that you didn't come across this check by mistake? Or some other way? Claire stared at him, heat rising in her chest. The audacity was almost impressive in its shamelessness. Behind her, she could feel the weight of other eyes, a man in a baseball cap, a young woman with a stroller, the security guard near the door. They weren't part of this moment, yet they were witnesses, their curiosity tinged with something darker. Are you implying I stole it? She asked. I'm saying, Stephen replied, feigning calm, that it's a lot of money for someone without an account here. Her laugh was short, humorless. I don't have an account here because I own the building, not the bank. Different priorities. His expression flickered, but the arrogance returned quickly. That's an interesting claim. Claire took a slow breath. She could slam her ownership papers down right now. She could call her attorney. But part of her, the part that had endured years of these tiny, sharp cuts, wanted to see how far Stephen would go. He picked up the check and studied it as though it might dissolve in his hands. Then, without another word, he stood up and disappeared into a back office. The waiting room buzzed faintly with whispers. Claire remained still, her eyes fixed on the polished counter, her hands resting calmly at her sides. But inside, the storm was gathering. She thought of her grandmother, who'd worked as a housemaid just blocks from here, saving pennies in jars, dreaming of a day her family could walk into places like this and be treated like they belonged. She thought of the long nights she'd spent building her real estate firm, of contracts negotiated, of the moment she'd signed the deed to this very property. And now, here she was still questioned, still doubted, still forced to prove what was already hers. Stephen reappeared, a manager in tow, a thin, tired-looking woman with glasses perched on her nose. There seems to be some issue with this transaction, she said. Is that so? Claire replied, voice cool. Yes, the manager said, adjusting her glasses. We'll need to hold the check for verification purposes. Verification, Claire repeated, tasting the word. You'll hold my check, without my consent, based on what exactly? It's standard procedure, Stephen said, stepping in. No, Claire said, her voice cutting through the hum of the room. It's not. It's whatever procedure you invented for the black woman standing in front of you. The silence that followed was dense, heavy. Even the printer in the corner seemed to hesitate. The manager's lips tightened. Ma'am, please lower your voice. Claire smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, I'm just getting started. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and with deliberate care, began recording. State your name for the camera, please, she said, pointing it at Stephen. He stepped back. I don't consent to. That's fine, Claire said, still recording. The internet doesn't need your consent to see how you treat customers, especially when those customers happen to be the landlord of this entire building. The murmurs in the lobby swelled into open gasps. The manager blinked. You own this building? Yes, Claire said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. And in about 2 minutes, I'll be on the phone with my property management team to discuss whether your branch deserves to stay in it. Stephen's face went pale. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. The man in the baseball cap let out a low whistle. Claire lowered her phone, not out of mercy, but because she'd already captured enough. Now, you're going to cash this check. Then you're going to apologize. And if you're very lucky, I might just let you keep your lease. The room was silent, but for the soft click of the pen as Stephen signed off on the transaction. Claire took her cash, slid it neatly into her bag, and turned to leave. At the door, she paused, looking back over her shoulder. Next time, she said, try treating every customer like they might own the place. Because one day they just might. She walked out into the sunlight, the weight of her grandmother's dream in her chest, the sound of stunned silence trailing behind her. Claire didn't make it far before her phone began to buzz in her bag. She didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. Marcus, her right-hand man at the firm, and the person most likely to have already seen the video upload she'd just posted. She answered without slowing her stride. Please tell me you didn't just nuke a bank branch on a Monday morning. Marcus's voice came through, half concerned, half impressed. Oh, I nuked them. All right, Claire said. And I've got the footage to prove it. Claire, Marcus sighed. You realize this is going to blow up, right? You've got the tenants meeting tonight, the community grant announcement tomorrow, and now, Claire interrupted. I've got a perfect example of why we still have to fight for every inch of respect in this city. This isn't just about me, Marcus. This is about all of us. She could hear him pause on the other end. Marcus knew her well enough to recognize that tone, the one she used when she'd already made up her mind. Fine, he said finally. But at least let me spin it before the vultures get to it. Send me the video. It's already on my socials, Claire replied. Of course it is. She hung up before he could say more. Claire wasn't being impulsive, not really. She'd learned long ago that stories like this had a shelf life in the public eye. If she waited, the fire would die before it could burn away the rot beneath. As she crossed the street toward the parking lot, she caught sight of herself reflected in the tinted glass of an office building. Perfectly tailored suit, clean lines, hair in a sleek bun, the image of professionalism. And yet, to Stephen, she'd been nothing more than a threat to his fragile sense of order. Her mind drifted back, unbidden, to a different building and a different version of herself. She was 13, clutching a wad of crumpled cash in both hands, standing at the counter of a convenience store in the neighborhood where her mother rented a tiny apartment. The clerk, older, white, with nicotine-stained fingers, had looked at her with the same suspicion Stephen had shown. Where'd you get this money? He'd asked, the bill still in his hand. My mom, she'd said. She told me to get milk and bread. He'd stared at her a moment longer before handing it back. Don't try anything funny, he'd muttered. She'd walked home that day with the milk, the bread, and the weight of a lesson her mother had never wanted her to learn. Sometimes, no matter how good you are, you'll still be guilty in someone's eyes. Back in the present, Claire slid into her black Tesla, started the engine, and let the quiet hum steady her breathing. The leather seat molded against her back as she drove toward the firm's office, her office just a few blocks away. By the time she arrived, Marcus was already waiting outside, phone in hand. You're trending, he said without preamble. Claire raised an eyebrow. That fast? He turned his phone toward her. A grainy still frame from the video, Stephen's startled face in the foreground. Claire's poised expression behind the camera was already circulating with captions like, when you try to play the landlord and she is the landlord, and this is what generational change looks like. Half the city is cheering, Marcus said. The other half is arguing in the comments. Claire smirked. Perfect. That means they're paying attention. They walked into the office, where the hum of keyboards and muted phone calls filled the air. The glass walls of the conference room reflected the midday light, casting a warm glow over the stacks of property blueprints and project proposals. Press is going to call, Marcus said, closing the door behind them. What's your angle? Claire took a seat at the head of the table. The truth. I went to cash a check. and instead I was given a live demonstration of why systemic bias is still alive and well. I'm not just telling my story, I'm telling my grandmother's, my mother's, and every person who's been made to feel like they're trespassing in places they rightfully belong. Marcus nodded slowly. You know they'll try to twist it. Make it about you being some rich landlord throwing your weight around. Then I'll make it about how I earned that weight, she said. The door cracked open and Simone, their media coordinator, poked her head in. Local news is asking for a statement. And she hesitated. The bank just called. Claire leaned back, folding her arms. Of course they did. They want to meet, Simone continued. Today, Marcus looked at Claire. What do you want to do? Claire tapped her fingers against the table. The rational part of her knew it would be easy to let the bank grovel in private, to take their apology and move on. But another part, the part that remembered every slight, every doubt, every door closed in her face, knew this was bigger than her comfort. Tell them I'll meet them, she said. But they're coming here. The meeting was set for 3 o'clock. By the time the bank's delegation arrived, the office was already buzzing with the low-grade energy of an impending showdown. Claire had deliberately arranged the conference room so that the large windows behind her desk framed the skyline, a subtle reminder of her place in it. Stephen didn't come. Instead, the branch manager from earlier, now looking markedly less composed, entered with a man in a dark gray suit who introduced himself as Regional Operations Director. They sat across from Claire and Marcus. The director cleared his throat. Ms. Bennett, first, allow me to apologize for the unfortunate interaction you experienced this morning. It does not reflect our institution's values. Claire held up a hand. Stop. Don't read me the script. I know how these conversations go. You're sorry I felt disrespected, not sorry for what happened. The director hesitated. We take matters like this very seriously. Good, Claire said evenly. Because I take them seriously too. That's why this conversation is going to be about more than an apology. I want to know what you're going to change. The manager shifted in her seat. We have diversity and inclusion programs. Then they're not working, Claire cut in. If they were, I wouldn't have been treated like a criminal for trying to cash a legitimate check. Marcus slid a folder across the table. Here's a list of incidents from your own branches in the past 2 years that made the news. This isn't isolated. This is systemic. The director scanned the documents, his jaw tightening. We're prepared to offer compensation for, this isn't about a payout, Claire said sharply. This is about accountability. I want mandatory bias training for every employee in your district. I want a public statement acknowledging what happened. And I want Stephen removed from any customer-facing role. The room was silent for a beat. That's quite a list, the director said. It's a start, Claire replied. By the time the meeting ended, the bank's representatives had agreed to review her proposals, which, in corporate language, meant they'd do it if public pressure made it painful not to. Claire knew the real battle would happen outside this room. As they left, Marcus closed the door and exhaled. You really don't hold back. Why should I, she said. Holding back never got us anywhere. Her phone buzzed again this time, with a notification from a national news outlet. The story had gone beyond the city now. Claire allowed herself a small smile. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was the fight. By Tuesday morning, the story wasn't just a story anymore, it was a movement. Claire's video had crossed 2 million views overnight. News outlets from New York to Los Angeles were replaying the moment she'd said. Treat every customer like they might own the place. Hashtags were multiplying. Check your bias. She owns it. Bank on equality. With every share came another story, people from all over posting about the times they'd been profiled, doubted, or humiliated for no reason other than the color of their skin. A black father denied entry to his own office building without an escort. A Latina woman questioned about whether her credit card was stolen. An Asian teenager followed through a store just in case. Claire sat at her kitchen counter, coffee steaming in her hand, scrolling through the messages pouring into her inbox. Some were thank yous. Some were pleas for help. A few were hate-filled rants from people who decided she was the villain of her own story. Her phone lit up again. Marcus, of course. You've got Good Morning America calling. They want you live tomorrow. Claire rubbed her temples. I'm not doing a fluff piece. It's not fluff if you control the narrative, Marcus replied. You don't just tell them what happened. You tell them what needs to change. Before she could answer, another call buzzed through an unfamiliar number, local area code. Against her better judgment, she answered. Ms. Bennett, A male voice asked. This is Stephen. She froze for a moment. Yes, she said flat. I wanted to apologize. For yesterday. The words sounded foreign coming from him, like they'd been written on a teleprompter. Why are you calling me, Stephen? There was a pause. Because I didn't know who you were. I didn't know you owned the building. Claire's chest tightened, the familiar burn of anger flaring up. So if I'd been just anyone, your treatment would have been fine? That's not what It's exactly what you meant, she cut in. Stephen, I don't care whether you knew my name, my net worth, or my job title. What I care about is that you saw a black woman with a large check and decided she was a problem to solve instead of a customer to serve. He didn't answer right away. She could hear his breathing, uneven. I grew up in a small town, he said finally. We didn't have a lot of diversity. That's not an excuse, she replied. It's a warning sign you ignored. Look, he said, desperation creeping into his voice. I might lose my job over this. Maybe you should, Claire said softly. Or maybe you should learn why it happened and how not to do it again. That's not my choice to make. But it is my choice to speak up so it doesn't keep happening. She ended the call before he could respond. By noon, Claire was in the firm's conference room with Marcus and Simone, sketching out the framework for something bigger than a press tour. This can't just be about the bank, Claire said, pacing. If it's only about them, it'll die when the news cycle moves on. We need to turn this into a platform. A nonprofit? Marcus suggested. Not just a nonprofit, she said. A watchdog, a resource hub, a place where people can report discrimination and actually get help. Legal aid, publicity, community support. And I'll fund the first year myself. Simone's eyes lit up. You'll be the face of it. No, Claire said, shaking her head. It's not about me. I'll launch it, but it needs to belong to the community. The second people think it's a vanity project, it's over. They brainstormed for hours names, mission statements, potential partners. By the time they broke for lunch, the whiteboard was covered in ideas. But outside the safety of her office, the backlash had begun. A popular talk radio host had dedicated an hour to calling her an entitled property mogul who humiliated a working-class guy just doing his job. An online columnist accused her of weaponizing race to settle a personal inconvenience. Marcus showed her the clips, watching for her reaction. I expected worse, she said finally. They're scared. That's why they're loud. That evening, she attended the Tenants Association meeting for the building the bank occupied. It was supposed to be a simple budget discussion, but as soon as she walked in, conversations hushed. People stared, some with admiration, some with wariness, some with a complicated mix of both. An older woman named Mrs. Hargrove, who ran the flower shop in the lobby, took Claire's hand. I saw the video, she said. You did good. My niece went through something like that last year. They made her cry, right there in the store. Claire squeezed her hand. Then she's exactly why I spoke up. But not everyone was so supportive. Midway through the meeting, Tom Richards, owner of the small insurance office on the third floor, cleared his throat. With all due respect, Ms. Bennett, this attention could be bad for business. Some of my clients are concerned. Claire met his gaze. If your clients are concerned about basic respect being given to customers, maybe they're the wrong clients. A murmur swept the room, some approving, some disapproving. Claire could feel the fracture lines, the way even moments of justice could divide people. After the meeting, she lingered by the doorway, talking to a few tenants who wanted updates. Outside, the summer evening was settling in, warm and heavy. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Marcus. Call me ASAP. CNN wants you tonight. Claire took a deep breath, staring out at the city skyline. She thought of her grandmother again, of those nights she'd sat at the kitchen table sorting coins into neat stacks. One day, baby, her grandmother used to say, you're going to own something they can't take from you. She had owned it. And still, they tried to take her dignity. Not this time. The CNN interview was conducted remotely from a small studio downtown. Claire sat under the bright lights, the microphone clipped to her jacket, her reflection staring back from the dark monitor in front of her. The anchor began with the standard questions: what happened, why she'd recorded it, what she hoped would come from it. Claire answered steadily, refusing to let her voice rise in anger even when the footage replayed on the screen behind them. But then the anchor asked, some critics say you're overreacting, that the clerk was simply following protocol. What do you say to that? Claire looked directly into the camera. I say that protocol is often the shield people hide behind to justify their prejudice. If protocol means humiliating a customer because of the color of their skin, then protocol is broken. And if calling that out is an overreaction, then maybe we should all start overreacting. The interview ended. The producer gave her a thumbs up as she stepped out of the studio. By the time Claire got home that night, her phone was nearly dead from constant notifications. But one message stopped her cold, a short email from a name she hadn't seen in years. Subject: I saw you from Lillian Harris. It was her old mentor, the woman who'd given her her first internship in real estate. Claire, the email read, I watched the video. I'm proud of you. And I think I have an idea for how to make this bigger than either of us. Call me. Claire sat back in her chair, the city lights flickering through the window. She had no idea what Lillian's idea was, but she knew one thing for certain. The fire was only just beginning to spread. The next morning, Claire called Lillian Harris. Tell me your idea, Claire said as soon as the line connected. Lillian chuckled, that deep, warm sound Claire had missed. Always impatient. All right, here it is. We take your moment and turn it into a movement. Not just a nonprofit, not just a watchdog, a coalition. We partner with other business owners, property holders, and community leaders who've seen the same thing happen. We build an alliance strong enough to make policy changes, not just headlines. Claire leaned back in her chair. A citywide alliance? Bigger, Lillian said. Regional. National, if we do it right. We lobby for anti-discrimination enforcement with teeth. We make sure businesses have no choice but to train their staff or face consequences. Claire felt the pieces click together in her mind. And you want me to front it? I want you to start it, Lillian replied. And then I want you to step back enough for it to outgrow you. That's how we make it last. They talked for an hour, mapping out the early steps. By the time they hung up, Claire had a plan, a list of calls to make, and a renewed sense of purpose. Meanwhile, the bank's public image was crumbling. The video had now been played on every major network. Editorials questioned their commitment to equality. Former employees were coming forward with stories of bias. The regional director, the same man who'd sat in her conference room trying to smooth things over, was forced to issue a statement promising swift action. Stephen's name had leaked online. Some called for his firing, others defended him. Claire kept her own comments about him measured. She didn't want this to turn into a personal vendetta. She wanted to focus on the system that enabled him. Still, she wasn't above a little poetic justice. At the next tenants' meeting, she announced calmly, the bank's lease will not be renewed when it expires in 6 months. I've already had interest from a credit union with a proven record of community investment. The room buzzed. A few people clapped. Others looked shocked. Claire simply sipped her water. 2 weeks later, the coalition Lillian had envisioned had its first official gathering. 40 people crowded into the event space of a downtown community center. Business owners, activists, lawyers, clergy. Some wore suits, others jeans and t-shirts, but all carried the same fire in their eyes. Claire stood at the front, looking out at them. I didn't ask to be the face of this, she began. I walked into a bank to cash a check. That's it. But because of the color of my skin, that check became a question mark, and I became a suspect. And I'm standing here because I know I'm not the only one. She told them about her grandmother's dream, about the milk and bread trip that had shaped her as a teenager, about the countless quiet indignities she'd carried. Then she laid out the vision: legal resources for victims, training programs for businesses, a public database of discrimination reports, and political lobbying for stronger laws. By the time she finished, the room was on its feet. The months that followed were a whirlwind. The coalition gained traction fast. Partner organizations came on board. Local TV covered their workshops. National outlets ran profiles. Even the mayor invited Claire to speak at a press conference about equity in public services. And then came the invitation she hadn't expected, a letter from the bank's CEO, asking her to join their corporate advisory board for diversity and inclusion. Marcus read it over her shoulder. They want you to help fix them from the inside. Claire set the letter down. No, they want my name to patch their image. You're going to say no? She thought for a moment. I'm going to say yes, but on my terms. When she met with the CEO, she handed him her binder with a detailed action plan for mandatory training, third-party audits, and public accountability. This isn't a negotiation, she told him. It's the cost of having me in the room. To her surprise, he agreed. 6 months to the day after the incident, the bank branch closed its doors in Claire's building. The credit union moved in within a week, hosting a ribbon-cutting ceremony that doubled as a community celebration. Mrs. Hargrove from the flower shop brought roses for Claire. "Your grandmother would have been proud," she said. Claire smiled, the ache in her chest both sweet and sharp. "I hope so." Stephen didn't attend. She hadn't seen him since that phone call. But she'd heard, through the grapevine, that he'd taken a job at a different bank after completing a diversity training program the coalition had helped develop. She chose to believe he'd learned something. On the anniversary of the coalition's founding, they held a rally in the same community center. The crowd had doubled. Claire took the stage, looking out at the faces young, old, every shade and background. "When they tell you to calm down, to wait, to let it go," she said, "remember this. Change doesn't come from silence. It comes from speaking the truth, over and over, until it can't be ignored." The applause roared. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the back, Lillian stood with her arms crossed, smiling like she'd known this ending all along. Later that night, Claire walked alone through the quiet streets, past the bank's old space now thriving under the credit union's banner. She paused, looking up at the building. She owned the building her grandmother could never have imagined her standing in front of as its landlord. For a moment, she let herself feel it all: the rage, the victory, the weight of responsibility, and the fragile, necessary hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be better. She whispered into the night, "We own more than buildings now." And she kept walking, her heels striking the pavement like a drumbeat, steady and unyielding. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.